Hello guys, today we'll be talking about organisms, living organisms and variety of living organisms in our environment. So there are many types of organisms. First we have plants, then we have animals, then we have fungi, then we have proto protoxys, protoxys and bacteria and viruses. So first we'll talk about plants. Plants are multicellular organisms, means they have many number of many cells many cells. And then we have plants usually have cellulose on the cell or cell wall. So every plant cell has a cell wall on the cell. So this basically means that these cells are having cellulose, and they have chloroplasts in their cells, which allows them to photosynthesize and produce their own food, and they can create their own glucose, and they store carbohydrates in the form of starch or sucrose. So produce glucose they produce glucose and they store it. Eventually they store it because they require glucose later in night when they don't have sunlight to perform photosynthesis. They perform respiration, which they use glucose in it, and this glucose is usually stored as in the form of starch in plants, and this starch allows them to allows plants to break starch down later in the future and use it for respiration. Then we have that plant cells or plants are eukaryotic, means that they have nucleus in the cell, which I'll explain this word later. And animals, they are multicellular organisms, same as plants, and they don't have chloroplasts in their cell. This means that they cannot photosynthesize and they cannot produce their own glucose, so they have to eat, or they have to feed on plants or animals to produce their own carbohydrates. And carbohydrates in animals are stored in the form of glycogen. They gather glucose and store it in the form of glycogen, and they have a nervous system which allows them to react to stimuli. And then fungi are multicellular organisms too, and this some are multicellular, which are mushrooms, toadstools and moles. And then we have unicellular, which are yeast, which means that they're single celled, and cell wall is made of chitin, as here is seen, the outer layer chitin. And then fungi don't contain chloroplast, so there's no photosynthesis. You can see this diagram, there's no chloroplast, so there's no photosynthesis occurring in this cell, and glucose is not produced. And then under the soil, the mushroom has many fine thread like filaments called hyphae. So these are hyphae, and together they are called as mycelium. So together they are called as mycelium. And when an organism feeds on that organic material in this way, and digestion take place outside of the organism, this is called saprotrophic nutrition. Enzymes that are secreted out of cells for this purpose are called extracellular organisms. So for example, there's a bread on the table, and a fungi spore lands onto the bread, and then it forms hyphae that eventually becomes mycelium. And this mycelium then goes into the roots of the bread, and it uses and takes up it releases enzymes to break down the food and make it soluble, so it can take in, like in this example, that enzyme secreted onto the foods. They secrete enzyme onto the food, and they as the food is broken down by the enzyme, then they absorb the soluble food, making it easier for them to feed. This is known as saprotrophic nutrition, which happens when an organism is dead and an organism is feeding on the dead material. Then you have prototists, which are known as dustbin kingdom, and most of these are single cell organisms. Prototists, which looks like animal cells, are known as protozoa, and which look like plant cells are known as algae. And most of them are unicellular, but some species such most of them are unicellular, but some of the species such as seaweeds are multicellular. And then there are some of these are agents to diseases like plasmodium, and which causes malaria. So this is not that important, but then we have two most important organisms, bacteria and viruses. Bacteria are single celled organisms, and they prokaryotic, which means they don't have nucleus in the cell. You can clearly see this in this diagram, that there's no nucleus here. And then we have that they do not have they do sometimes contain chloroplast, which allows them to conduct photosynthesis, and they do respond to stimuli sometimes, which means that they can detect stimuli. Some of these the bacteria has these characteristics, and mostly are saprophytes, as they feed on dead material, which makes them decomposers, and this gives them the name decomposers, which will be very useful in the future. And then we have that there are three different shapes of bacteria: spears, rods like this, and spirals. These are three main types of or steam three main different shapes of bacteria, and they do have flagellum, which allows them to propel through to their destination or to their target. There is a flagellum, and they have cell wall and their cell surface membrane. They don't have nucleus, which makes them to have the genetic material to be in the plasmid, and they have some of the genetic material in the chromosomes, so they make up the genetic material of the bacteria. And now we'll discuss about viruses. Even bacteria do cause some diseases which are dangerous. At least food, for example, is one of the disease caused by least, and Lactobacillus bulgaricus is an species of rod-shaped bacteria, which helps in the production of yogurt, and some are pathogen, which causes pneumonia also. So the uses and disadvantages of bacteria. And viruses are all parasite, and they reproduce inside living cells. They live in an host, means there's a cell, cheek cell, and they live in that cell. And then we have viruses are not made up of cells, they are made up of the genetic material of the cell which they are living in, for example host cell. Then they have the genetic material carried by a DNA like this, or RNA. And then we have viruses are mostly non-living thing, because they only reproduce. For a living thing, a living thing material should at least respire, feed, excrete, move, grow, or respond. They don't do this, and which makes them mostly in between living and non-living thing, as they only reproduce inside a living cell. They cannot live without a host cell. And then they cause many diseases like HIV, which causes AIDS, and measles, mumps, cold, polio, and rubella are some of the most popular examples of these diseases. And then the envelope on in this diagram here allows it to gain entry into host cell. And the protein protects genetic information and provides shape for the virus. This protein code protects the genetic material, the DNA and RNA, and keeps the virus in a fixed shape. And then we have eukaryotic cells, which don't have nucleus, like viruses and bacteria. And prokaryotic cells, which have nucleus, like animals and plants and fungi. So guys, this was all about variety of living organisms in the environment. I hope you like the video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.